Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and this is Dialogues on Nurturing Empathy. And today I'm here with Jessica Alexander. Hi, Jessica, and thank you for joining
Hi,
me.
thanks for
And
having me.
yeah, thanks, great. And I just maybe gave a little introduction that you're from your website. I see that you're an American expatriate, author, columnist, cultural trainer, and that you graduated with a BS in psychology, and you're teaching communication and writing skills in Scandinavia and in Central Europe, and you're now living in Rome. Is that right? And,
Yes.
and you married a Dane, and for 13 years you lived in Rome with your two children. And the reason we're talking is you're the author of a co-author of a book, The Danish Way of Parenting, what the happiest people in the world know about raising confident and capable kids. And your website is thedanishway.com. And you also, I found two articles that you wrote. One was called Teaching Kids Empathy in Danish Schools. It's a piece of cake. And then another article was The Danish Way Trumps the American Dream. And you start off by saying, I used to undervalue the importance of empathy until I married a Dane. So what we want to talk about is just your insights about how we might nurture and teach empathy.
Okay. Yeah. So I married a Dane now 15 years ago. So I've been together for 17. Lived in Scandinavia. I've spent a lot of time in Denmark, and I always noticed how serene and happy the children were, and calm, and back in those days I wasn't a very maternal person, so I was very interested in what was happening with these children, because I wanted one of those. I wanted a Danish child, and of course I was interested in the children, but it's also true of the people as well. They're very there's a different sort of vibe going on there, and of course many years later I read about the happiness reports, where Denmark has been voted consistently for 40 years in a row as one of the happiest people in the world. And this year again, they're the happiest people on the planet. And I realized that I believe that this was because of the way they parented their children, and because happy kids grow up to be happy parents. And one of the things they use in their parenting is empathy. So empathy is I came to learn as I researched for the book. Denmark is a hugely empathic society. It's probably one of the most empathic societies in the world, and I really think that is one of the biggest connections to why they are also so happy. Because of course, we now see the connection between empathy and real happiness.
So what I'm hearing there is that you actually, I guess you had gone to Denmark and you'd seen the children and how serene and happy they were. And you're saying, hey, this is really good. I want one of those.
Yeah, yes. And I wanted to know how I could make one of those. Because, I didn't live in Denmark, so I wasn't part of the system. But I was always observing how families were doing it. And I was always, whenever I had questions, I always went to my Danish family and my friends. And I started always deferring to their advice over any of the parenting books I had read. And that's when I realized I was starting to use this Danish way of teaching, of parenting. And then it was the many years later that I put two and two together, that, wow, this is really special. This is different. This is not the Italian way. This is not the American way. This is not the French way. This is something so special. And yes, and one of the one of the pillars of the Danish way of parenting is teaching empathy. And some of the things, for example, that we did at home, that my husband was very into doing, was reading stories that had all kinds of endings. So that's very Danish. Danes are extremely honest with their kids. They don't shy away from difficult topics. They don't feel the need that everything has to have a happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, a lot of Danish fairy tales have really sad or ambiguous endings, which I think for us as Americans can be a little bit strange.
Well, I think
Because,
that's one thing you do in at least in your articles, is you're comparing the American culture, which I
right,
understand that you're from the American culture, and you're
right,
comparing it to the Danish culture. So what I'm hearing
right.
there is that, the American culture might be more happy ending oriented, and then the Danish has maybe more authenticity in terms of
Yes, yes,
how
yes.
reality, like how life really is.
Yes, yes. I mean, I compare it because, of course, I examine myself not only as a person and as a parent, but I examine myself as an American. And what was the biggest eye opener for me was when I took down my American lenses of seeing the world, and I put on a Danish way of seeing things, and I saw myself objectively, and I saw my culture in a different light. And that's what I think is so powerful if people were able to see how much our culture shapes our beliefs. And there's these studies that show that empathy has dropped, for example, like 50% in the last, what is it, 20, 30 years in America. Narcissism is on the rise. And when you realize that so much of the way our culture has been structured, like survival of the fittest, I can do it, I am an individual, that's the bedrock of what it means to be American. And it's really interesting when you start to see that, because then you can have a kind of illumination in a way, because you realize, wait, this is not necessarily who I have to be. This is also very much cultural based. So it's easy to look at another culture and maybe judge it as seeming strange, or why would you read unhappy endings to a child? Because in America we like happy endings. But what we found in the research was, the more you read to children also about sadness, about death, about things that also happen in life, you teach them empathy.
Well, you're maybe one way then of fostering empathy is to travel. So what I'm hearing is you went from one culture, the American culture, into the Danish culture, and you were able to see the world from their perspective. And just as an addition, I spent like 10 years in my youth traveling around the world. And I had that same experience of going into another culture. There's a whole different feel to the
Yeah.
culture. And it was really, I just realizing, oh, this way that I am not the only way. There's another way of seeing the world, another way of experiencing the world. So it seems like that's maybe one of the aspects of deepening our empathy is perhaps travel. And then I'm hearing it's also, in terms of reading, is really addressing different feelings. So you're saying talking about the full spectrum of feelings.
Yeah. Yes. I'll give you an example. So I had heard we get a lot of books from my Danish family, and I had heard many of the books that my husband was reading to my daughter, and they were kind of shocking for me. But it was very difficult for me to find equivalents in English. And just recently, there's been a Danish children's book about death that's been translated into English. So I couldn't wait to get a copy. That sounds really morbid, but I wanted to practice what I preach. So I read this book to my daughter about death. It's a character who comes to a children's house to take their grandmother away. And anyway, it's a very interesting take on talking about death, and it doesn't end it doesn't end sad or happy. It just kind of ends. There's no tie up. And my daughter and I talked about this, and it was, and she's 7. So what I was surprised about was she wasn't that, she was like, okay, well, I don't know why death has to come, but, she went off to play. But what was interesting was how reading that book affected me.
Mm-hmm.
So later that day, whereas usually she would ask me to play, and maybe I'm kind of there, I'm not there, there was something about me being aware of these different emotions that made me so much more present. and so much more appreciative of every single second. So it has a knock-on effect for parents as well, I think, and people.
So both the children and the parents are growing in that way, is kind of what I'm hearing there, that you, by reading about death, that you were kind of affected by that.
Yeah, and different emotions and what they brought up for me, and how different it was for me not to say, oh, but then death didn't take the grandmother and everything was just fine. You know, because that's what I would more accustomed to.
Putting a positive spin on it.
Putting a positive spin on it. But what we found again was sometimes by focusing too much on that happy ending, that doesn't actually put you in touch with your humanity, because that's not necessarily really a reflection of reality. So sometimes we get disappointed because life isn't always a happy ending. So yeah, I mean, I think that's being more authentic about a lot of emotions. This journey for me as a person and as a parent is taught me how not only can we teach children empathy, but it starts with you. I'm learning how to be more empathic because I didn't realize it was a skill you could get better at. And I think, again, from our American culture, we don't teach empathy in school. We don't consider empathy something you have to learn. Not when I was growing up. And in Denmark, they teach empathy already in preschool to children, which is fascinating.
What I'm hearing there is that it's almost like more of a relationship, that everyone in the family is learning to be more empathic. I mean, it's kind of what that you're, as an adult, as a parent, you're learning to grow in your empathy as well as your children. It's just not you teaching the children. And now you're starting to say that within the schools, it's they're like explicitly or more consciously teaching empathy.
Yes, it's part of their curriculum. It's like teaching math or English. It's that important. And so this is obvious. You know, we know now from the research that we're all wired for empathy, but we have to hook the wires up. And you know, it of course, I think it starts with you. You know, you can, in order to also share, to become more empathic, you know, it helps that you learn yourself. And in our book, you know, we talk about, like, what does empathy mean to you? How empathic are you? How are you thinking about other people? These are all kinds of things that, you know, kids then mirror you. You are the example. You know, if you're not empathic, forget teaching it. They mirror you. So
really be the role model then, that you have to, as the parent, you have to really model the empathy, or maybe even the classroom, I imagine, the teachers and the staff. You have to create that empathic environment and not just be sort of teaching it. You have to be empathic, but let's really create this, be these role models.
Right. But that also comes back to this authenticity we were talking about before. It's getting, also knowing who you are, being in touch with yourself. I think that's extremely important in order to be the model, right? I think many people are disconnected to themselves, and they're living this life they think they're supposed to live, but not always, you know, in touch with who you really are and what you really feel. And I think that's also coming from, a lot of us grow up being told how to feel. You know, like sometimes it's like, don't cry. Don't be sad. Stop being angry. This is all stunting empathy. Because it's not allowing.
It's not that authenticity. Like, you want to authentically feel all the feelings that you're having and be able to express that. And
but if you're told not to, if you're told not to feel those feelings, then you start to not trust what you feel. And I think we have that a lot in our culture. This distrust of our own feelings, and yeah, I think so. That's why it's also important to get in touch with them and be more open with kids about them, and allow them to feel what they feel, and not tell them, no, you shouldn't feel that way. We have
how do you connect into your own feelings then? It's like, if it's about you as a parent, connecting to your own feeling? Do you have some strategies that you do, or the Danes, they have a way of connecting to their own feelings? I'm hearing, read books about real emotions,
Right.
maybe as one strategy. Are you doing something for kind of tapping into that?
Well, I think, again, coming back to the idea of all feelings being okay, that means you have to be okay with your own feelings and be okay with, you're not going to have a good day every day. Some days are a grumpy day. Some days are a happy day. Some days are, and stop judging, negative feelings. There's no bad emotions. There's only emotions. It's like the spectrum of the color wheel. It would be like saying only blues and purples are okay, but oranges and reds aren't good. We have a bit of a judgment on being angry or being grumpy or being, but it's just another part of the emotional spectrum. So I think getting okay with the fact that you always smiling. It's okay. As I said, the reading of the of stories. Also, not focusing so much on winning. Focusing more on like the process involved, and also I'm praising more for interacting. So like my kids, when they're interacting together, I'm trying never to say compare them, like, oh, she's so much better at that than you, or look how good she is at that. Oh, I think, because I think that sets up competition, which is the bedrock of, again. So instead, when I see her sharing or being nice or doing something sweet or being thoughtful, then I really praise, because I want them to understand that that's what is important, is kindness. We care about kindness. We care about empathy. We care about not being the best and being the winner and all of that, because I think that, that will come what they feel in time, but I don't want to foster, because I feel like that's disconnecting. But the very competitiveness is very disconnecting. It's not connecting.
Yeah, America is such a competitive culture, and it's the political system is competitive, business is competitive, school is competitive. Everybody says you have to compete and win, and yeah, I really see that too as a real block to empathy.
It's a huge block. It's a huge block, because if you're always striving to be the winner and to be the best, then you're not. And again, like when you actually win as a team, when you do something together as a team, it's so much more fulfilling, and our brains are actually hooked up for that. And we all, we have tons of research that's proving this now. We have this social brain, all this information coming out, that we feel better cooperating than from winning alone. And that's what I hope is going to come out more and more. So we realize, hold on, we've all been talking about winning, but we really want to be happy. So actually, let's get with the program. We'll be happier by cooperating and winning together than by winning alone.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, it makes sense. There's I think in America, culture is, you compete, you win, and then you have this big rush of emotion, like, yeah, I won. So you kind of get the reward. We're at another approach, more of an empathic approach, is that it's a sense of social connection. And through social connection, we feel better, we feel seen, we feel like we belong. And then so that's maybe, and then there's actually happiness that, from my understanding, the real guide or gateway to happiness is social connection. So it sounds like the Danish way is kind of focusing on creating social connection.
Yes. And I mean, I'll give you another example, the fundamental example, I think, of how this works. And let me say also, I don't, I'm not saying, let's recreate Denmark and we have to have this kind of system, because there's a lot of things I love about the American way, and I think there's a happy medium. I'm not like extreme one way or the other, but I think there could be, if we could put somehow this together, we could have an amazing outcome. But one place where, for example, we really work on empathy. Not like we don't say it that way, but I know that it's fostering this, is the very Danish concept of hygge. So hygge is extremely Danish. It means cozy times with friends and family. And a lot of people talk about it being cakes and tea and nice atmosphere and candles. But what hygge actually is, after many years of studying it and trying to work out what it was, hygge is a psychological space, a safe psychological space that you enter into with your loved ones. So the Danes do this naturally because they grow up, hygge is such a part of their culture, they don't think about these rules. But as an American or as a foreigner, in order for hygge to work, we have to be aware that you have to make a bit of an effort to. So imagine you go into this hygge space, and at the door you leave your negativity, your complaining, your work stress, your bragging, your gossiping. That does not come into the hygge space. For the hygge time, you have a meal, everyone helps out, you can talk about good memories, anything that doesn't make someone else have to put their guard up. So, mindfulness, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've heard of mindfulness.
Sure.
So I describe hygge as we-fulness.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried it with my family. There's a hygge oath in the book. It works amazing. My American family I've tried it with. And what's so great about hygge is it's incredibly recharging for the body and soul, because it feels good to spend drama-free time with your family. And I don't think we realize how often we go into family gatherings and there's some kind of, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like competition or negativity or something that is disconnecting. And so hygge is a huge, I think, a big, that fosters empathy.
Yeah, it's you can put a name to that feeling. So it sounds like can't think of a comparable name to the concept, to the experience in English. I know in German they have something called Gemütlichkeit, which seems very similar. It just has a cozy feel. It's usually in the home. You feel comfortable, you feel warm, you feel connected. And there's a specific concept term to describe that feeling, and it sounds like that's maybe what
it's
that.
A little different. Hygge is like, that's also like gezellig in Dutch.
Mm-hmm.
They have the same. It's not exactly the same.
Okay.
Hygge is extremely Danish, and it's a verb and it's an adjective, and it's no joke. Like it's serious. It's and like I said, I've been doing it for years, and I kept thinking, what is going on? How is it possible that I can spend so much time with these people, my Danish family, and there's never a debate, an argument? It's always smooth. It's always this kind of happy feeling. And sometimes it could even seem like a little bit superficial from my standpoint, because I'm used to going into heavy debates with my family or, that kind of thing. But then I realized it's not superficial. It's just a way to be able to be we, not me.
Mm-hmm.
It's we time, not me time. And kids benefit the most from this because they love nothing more than to be with their family without any drama. So I think if we could adopt hygge in America or England or Italy or wherever, that would be a great step for families and friends.
Well, I was wondering, in the schools, are they explicit about empathy? Do they use the word? I mean, I don't know what the Danish word for empathy is, but do they?
No, they don't use the word.
Okay.
They don't use the word, but they know, like the teachers. So it's very interesting. So, for example, in preschool, they have something called step-by-step program or cat kit, and they show kids pictures of other kids' emotions. and have them talk about them and how they feel. And I mean, this is already in preschool. They're conceptualizing other kids' emotions. They work a lot. They can work a lot with touch, like touching each other. How do they feel? You know, what's too hard, what's not. You know, these kinds of things. Which, and yeah. So and then teachers are trained to teach. Education has two meanings. It's to educate academically and to educate to be a good citizen, a good person to other people, which is, I mean, again, like I don't know, the more I've learned about it, the more I've begun to think, why are we so focused only on academics? You know, when we see that also free play, you know, we know play is teaching kids so much. Play is teaching kids empathy. Kids are learning to be empathic when we allow them to play together and we don't micromanage everything they're doing. And it has made me wonder, when we see things that empathy is such a huge factor in making successful business leaders, successful people in many walks of life, I wonder why we focus so much only on math and science and English and testing and these sorts of things. So hopefully that would also pick up in America, but I think it's going to be a trickle-down effect. So I've read that, for example, Harvard or some of these Ivy League schools are starting to change their entrance exam or their entrance requirements, what they're looking for. And I read an article that there's some of them are starting to look for more empathy. And I thought, oh my gosh, hallelujah! If it starts from Harvard, you know, we'll start getting our preschoolers more empathic.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds like a good vision. That's really what I'm very interested in, is how do we really transform society so that empathy becomes a primary social value? And there's all these different strategies that we can do, and you know, and to be open to looking at other cultures too, to learn how different cultures are bringing in more of an empathic way of being into their culture.
Right. What do you think about this idea that if it changes from what the universities, especially the Ivy League ones, because that's the dream, if the universities started changing what they were looking for, that because just so many parents are thinking about university already when their kids are preschoolers, they start saving, they start thinking, you know, putting them in the block building class that will get them into Harvard. And parents feel this incredible pressure to make their kids competitive and get their kids trained up to have that edge, which is the opposite of what we're talking about. What do you think?
I think it's totally insane. I do a process which I call empathy circles as a way of practicing empathy in small groups, you know, using active listening or empathic listening as one of the tools. And I did a workshop with some high school students that were taking classes at Stanford. And we use empathic listening. The students were sharing like their experiences. They were all so stressed out. I was like in total shock. I mean, I was like, the level of stress that they were under was, I mean, it was, you could cut it with a knife. And I compared that to, you know, growing up in the 60s and 70s. And, you know, there was a lot of time playing and going out bike riding, and just that stress. I just found it like really, you know, I was just quite amazed at, you know, the pain. There's so much pain involved in that stress as well. So and did you feel that they were able to listen empathically to the others very well? I thought they were. One of them was talking about the disconnect between her and her father, and she was actually wanting to try some empathic listening with him to get him to listen to her better, so that they would have some tools for dialoguing with each other. And I think it, or it could be, you know, that our culture needs to shift from that, I mean, to from that stress, from that competition, from that disconnect, for that striving for materialism, to really fostering that empathy and that connection, because that's really where, you know, where we just feel better. I think it's actually in the end really more effective in terms of getting things done as well. And I think, you know, countries like, Denmark or even Finland, who I think is also along this line. I mean, they rate as the most creative school systems in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Scandinavian. This is all, you know, it's all very similar. The schooling and stuff. They've got a lot of similarities, and again, you know, one of my because when I became a parent, that's when I really got, geez, is this how I want to do it? You know, I was pulled by this American side of me that was like, I've got to enroll them in things, you know, and I started making that comparison, but it was that time that I was like, I was listening to my husband reframe with my daughter her language to, you know, be more open or more empathic or whatever, and I was so grateful for this Danish influence, and because I thought this is going to change her life. And I was reading the happiness reports in the newspaper at the same time, and I thought, wow, here we are in America, like that's all we want. Like there's books and books and books and books and books, you know, and yet here we have these countries, because I mean, I think also Norway, Finland, they all score high on this, you know. Why aren't we looking more to those countries? Like, look, we have measurements, right? We like measurements. We like things to be the best. They're the best at happiness. Why don't we learn more from those countries? It's you know, it's I don't know. It's a hope.
Yeah, well, Finland, I mean, Denmark rates consistently as one of the happiest, or the happiest country in the world. I'm not quite sure how those measurements work, but then Finland is also rated as a top educational system.
Yeah, the best school system, the best. Yeah, they're so highly educated.
Yeah,
and yet they don't, and they play until they're 7 years old, and they don't get graded. They don't get grades. They don't get homework. You know, it's the same in Denmark, and it's so extreme for us to imagine. But I think that's because we're so obsessed with measurements. We need measurements to believe something's working. And that's where I think the biggest mind shift has to take place. We don't need measurements. We don't need grades. We don't need everything, you know, because I think that's what's really causing us to be stressed out all the time. Kids
so instead of measurements, maybe what is the real experience going on inside? Maybe looking in, like, what is the real experience?
Yeah, and how you know, we don't have to always compete with each other. You know what I mean? Like, also I was just talking to I have a Danish friend here now, and she was telling me about, she does this Danish gymnastics. They have a totally different sports mentality there as well. And they don't do competitive gymnastics. It's all about like this, you know, what did you say? Like, you know, the feeling. It's about the movement, enjoying the movement and the feeling. And she was saying, you know, we don't compete with each other. Maybe we compete with ourselves. Like I try to see, well, can I make that position better next time for me? Which is a very different mentality than the you know, the competitive and that focusing on it being a good feeling with the group. You know, bringing that group feeling.
Well, and at closing, what direction are you going now with your work? Are you continuing to work on empathy? I know you're working with some of the educators in Denmark, I believe.
Yep. Yes, I'm working on a book idea, which is definitely having a lot of empathy undertones, and yeah, and it's a fascinating journey, because it takes me, you know, all the time. Of course, I'm still focusing on Denmark because I think there's still so much we can learn, but it's taking me on a very interesting journey. So but it's a work in progress. I'm still promoting this book. It just came out last month. So that's been a lot of work. But as soon as the promoting period goes down, I'm going to work more on my next book.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you for spending this time to talk about empathy and how we can foster it. And the book is The Danish Way of Parenting, What the Happiest People in the World Know About Raising Confident, Capable Kids. And the website is thedanishway.com. So thank you very
and if
much.
you want to know more, I also have my author page, which is jessicajoellealexander.com, or my Twitter is jessicajoelle_. So if anybody has questions, please reach out.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.